Hello everyone, this is Paleo Nerd here with the fourth part of my Jurassic Fight Club analysis. In this video, I will be covering the fourth episode of Jurassic Fight Club, Bloodiest Battle, going over the designs of the dinosaurs and the fight itself to determine what is accurate and inaccurate about it. This is by far the most ambitious episode in the series, as 4 different species are depicted in the fight: Stegosaurus, Ceratosaurus, Allosaurus, and Camarasaurus. After watching it, it seems like this episode is determined to beat out the previous 3 episodes as the most inaccurate in the series, and this video will explain why. Since there's a lot of animals to cover, I'll try and go through this as quickly as possible, otherwise this section alone could end up being almost an hour long. First, we have Stegosaurus, which really needs no introduction, as it's right along T-Rex as the most popular dinosaur in pop culture. Stegosaurus is a stegosaurid within the clade Thyreophora, which includes all ornithischian dinosaurs with armor plating, like ankylosaurs and stegosaurs. Stegosaurus as a genus currently consists of 3 distinct species: S. stenops, S. ungulatus, and S. sulcatus. Based on the setting, this species depicted is likely the type species Stegosaurus stenops, which translates to narrow-faced roof lizard, referring to its narrow face and the plates that lined its back, which were originally thought to be positioned like shingles on a roof. This species could reach a maximum length of 7 meters or 23 feet long, a height of about 3 meters or almost 10 feet to the tallest spike, and a weight of around 3 tons. It was an herbivore and relied on its back plates and tail spikes, called thagomizers, for defense. While the plates were fragile and served as poor armor, they likely made the animal appear bigger to potential predators, discouraging confrontations. Its more famous method of defense, however, are the 4 long thagomizers at the end of its tail. Scientists have found plenty of evidence that Stegosaurus and its kin used these as weapons, as fossils have been found that suggest that several theropods ended up on the business end of Stegosaurus's tail. So how does its Jurassic Fight Club counterpart hold up? Well, for the most part, it looks quite a bit like the real animal, although there are a few problems. The neck should be longer, the animal looks a bit shrink-wrapped, and the tail should be longer. The animal is also oversized, as the show puts it at a length of 28 feet or 8.5 meters long and a height of 14 feet or over 4 meters tall, which fits more with the larger S. ungulatus species rather than S. stenops, although the weight is accurate at around 3 tons. That's really it for Stegosaurus. Time to move on to the next combatant. Next we have Ceratosaurus, which has around 2 to 3 different species, depending on which ones are considered valid. But for now, we'll assume that the Ceratosaurus in the show is Ceratosaurus nasicornis, the type species and the only one whose validity isn't greatly questioned. This species name translates to horned lizard with a nose horn, referring to the 3 horns on the top of its head, and specifically the one above the nose. These horns are quite thin, and were likely used more for display than for combat. The animal is believed to reach a maximum length of 5.5 to 7 meters or 18 to 22 feet long, a height of 1.5 to 2 meters or 5 to 6.5 feet tall at the shoulder, and weigh between 3/4 of a ton to a ton. It lived during the Tithonian of the late Jurassic, about 153 to 148 million years ago, and is mostly known from the Morrison Formation of North America, although possible specimens have been found in Portugal and Tanzania. It coexisted with larger theropods like Allosaurus and Torvosaurus, and it's likely that these theropods filled different ecological niches to avoid competition. Although it might look closely related to tetanurans like Allosaurus, it is actually much more basal, being the namesake for a group of theropods called ceratosaurs, which split off from tetanurans early in theropod evolution during the early Jurassic. As such, it exhibits a lot of basal features, including four-fingered hands and a row of osteoderms running down its back. How does the Jurassic Fight Club version compare? Well, using Ceratosaurus nasicornis for comparison, it is much more lightly built and resembles a horned Allosaurus more than Ceratosaurus. The legs are too long. It looks like it's been taking its new diet way too seriously based on how thin it is. Its hands are pronated, its arms are too long, its fingers are way too long, looking more like E.T.'s fingers with claws. Its tail should be straighter, its horns are too sharp, and it seems to lack osteoderms aside from a small row down its spine, when the real animal likely had many small scoots down its back. While the length and weight are accurate for Ceratosaurus, the show's version is too tall, as it is put at 13 feet or 4 meters tall. Overall, not very good, and I think it really says a lot about its design when I can accurately say that Jurassic Park's Ceratosaurus is more accurate. One more thing that I might as well address now is that the show makes repeated claims that Ceratosaurus used to be the top predator of North America, and then Allosaurus showed up and, being larger, stronger, and smarter, eventually drove Ceratosaurus to extinction. This could not be farther from the truth. First, Allosaurus and Ceratosaurus both appear in the fossil record at around the same time, and Ceratosaurus might have even appeared after Allosaurus. Second, they both went extinct at around the same time as well, at the end of the Jurassic period, meaning it is unlikely that one caused the extinction of the other. If that was the case, then we would see Ceratosaurus disappear from the fossil record before Allosaurus, but that isn't the case based on what we have. And third, there is no evidence that these two predators competed with each other for food. Chances are that Ceratosaurus and Allosaurus filled two different niches in their environment, and as such didn't compete for food. The same could be said for other large carnivores that lived in the Morrison, like Torvosaurus, Saurophaganax, and Marsasaurus. They likely all hunted different prey, with very little violent interactions between them. Think of the Morrison kind of like the African savanna today. All these different predators like lions, hyenas, and African wild dogs, for the most part, peacefully coexisting with each other because they hunt different prey. Now, obviously, there likely wasn't complete peace between Ceratosaurus and Allosaurus, as the latter could easily consider the other as prey. However, it is unlikely that Allosaurus caused Ceratosaurus' extinction like the show claims, nor was Ceratosaurus ever in decline or near extinction during the time this episode is set. Speaking of Allosaurus, now the next animal in this episode is a bit complicated. This animal right here is referred to in the show as Allosaurus, most likely the type species Allosaurus fragilis, which translates to fragile different lizard. However, this species is believed to reach a maximum length of around 8.5 to 9 meters or 28 to 30 feet long, a height of 2 to 2.5 meters or 6 to 8 feet high at the shoulder, and a weight of around 2 to 2.5 tons. Meanwhile, the animal in Jurassic Fight Club is oversized to say the least, at a length of 38 feet or 11.5 meters long, 16 feet or 4.8 meters tall at the shoulder, and a weight of 8,000 pounds or 4 tons. That's pretty large for an Allosaurus, but there's another carnivore that fits that size range almost perfectly. Enter Saurophaganax maximus, translating to the largest lord of the lizard eaters. Probably one of the coolest dinosaur names ever. This animal almost perfectly fits the size range of the Allosaurus in Jurassic Fight Club, at a length of about 10.5 to 12 meters or 34 to 40 feet long, a height of around 3 meters or 10 feet tall at the shoulder, and a weight of around 3 to 4 tons. Now, I am aware that Saurophaganax is occasionally considered a species of Allosaurus, Allosaurus maximus, but since the most recent studies and reviews view it as a separate genus, I will be considering it a separate genus as well. Another possible problem is that Saurophaganax is quite rare, with fossils only known from Oklahoma and possibly New Mexico. Of course, it was very likely present in Utah as well, as it is unlikely that it was limited to 2 states before states were ever established. That being said, I will occasionally use the name Allosaurus when referring to it outside of the fight, but the Allosaurs in the fight itself will be referred to as Saurophaganax. However, there are still some physical inaccuracies. Since Saurophaganax and Allosaurus look very similar, I'll use both for comparison. Jurassic Fight Club's Allosaurus/Saurophaganax has the typical pronated hands, and it is also strangely thin, as if it's on the same diet as Ceratosaurus. Besides looking like it's in desperate need for a sandwich, the tail should be straightened out more, and the head doesn't quite match the skull of the animal. Finally, the show's version lacks the giant Spinosaur-like hand claws that Allosaurus is known for, which is kind of surprising since you'd think they want bigger claws to make the animal look cooler. Anyway, we got one more dinosaur to go and then we're on to the fight. Finally, we have the most common sauropod known from the Morrison Formation, Camarasaurus. The genus Camarasaurus has 3 distinct species, C. supremus, C. lentus, and C. grandis. Unfortunately, the show doesn't give a specific species. However, the episode is based on the discovery of a predator trap in the Cleveland Lloyd quarry of the Morrison Formation. This quarry only contains 1 species of Camarasaurus, C. lentus, the most common of the 3, so that's the one we'll use. Lentus is the smallest of the 3 species, reaching a length of 15 meters or 50 feet long, a height of about 5 meters or 16 feet tall at the shoulder, and weighing around 30 to 40 tons. Like other sauropods, adult Camarasaurus were protected from predators by their sheer bulk, and if necessary they could use their incredibly muscular tails to severely wound or kill any attacker. Let's see how the version depicted in the show holds up. So, Camarasaurus really only has a few inaccuracies in terms of design. First, the head is off, as the show's version has a more rounded head like Pac-Man, while the real animal's head isn't completely circular and is shorter than Jurassic Fight Club's version. Also, the back should slant downwards, the tail is too long, the neck should not go straight up, but rather at a more 45-degree angle, and it lacks claws on its back feet, instead having more elephant-like feet. Finally, Camarasaurus is oversized, as it is put at a shoulder height of 20 feet or 6 meters tall and a length of 60 feet or 18 meters long. That size fits more with C. grandis than C. lentus, although the weight is put at 20 tons, which is lighter than even C. lentus. So Jurassic Fight Club's Camarasaurus is taller and longer, but somehow lighter. That's really it for inaccuracies regarding the combatants. Now it's time to cover the fight. And boy, does the fight get real bonkers real quick. The fight begins at a drying lake in Utah 150 million years ago, as a mother Stegosaurus and her offspring head to a lake to drink. At least I think it's a mother. The show is really inconsistent with the genders for these two.
A Stegosaurus and its baby.
The juvenile's basically helpless. It normally relies on its mother to be able to protect it. But she's stuck up to her shoulders in mud, so she can't use her main weapon, which is her spiked tail. Like its mother, the little juvenile has spikes, but he can't move them because he's literally exhausted from trying to get out of the mud.
Directly in front of her hind legs, a helpless Stegosaurus and her young. One of them takes advantage of the Stegosaurus' vulnerable position and uses him as a platform.
Massive weight on the female Stegosaurus causes her body to lean forward. This frees her tail.
A Stegosaurus wielding his lethal tail spikes.
For now, I'll just consider them a female adult and a male juvenile. Anyway, the two head down for a drink, but soon find themselves breaking through the hardened upper crust of the lake bed and stuck in the mud below. They try in vain to break free, but their attempts only succeed in attracting a Ceratosaurus who is desperate for a kill. This is where it gets a bit iffy in regards to accuracy. Throughout the fight, it is explained that the predators, Ceratosaurus and Saurophaganax, don't sink in the mud because their toes are splayed outwards, allowing them to disperse their weight across the crust without breaking it, while the herbivores have more compact feet, meaning they easily break through the crust.
Its long toes and splayed foot design allow it to move across the upper crust without breaking through. They use an anatomical adaptation to their advantage: splayed toes.
The Allosauruses don't get stuck in the mud like the Camarasaurus for two reasons. Number one, they don't weigh as much, but number two, they have a remarkable adaptation. It's the design of their foot. Like modern birds, their toes are splayed out in 3 different directions. This configuration gives them incredible traction when they're running at high speeds, but it also gives them stability. And the weight of the body is distributed between these 3 toes and not straight down, as in the foot of Camarasaurus. They work like snowshoes, keeping the body from breaking through the upper hard crust while allowing them unimpeded movement across the lake bed.
However, I have my doubts. Yes, the Stegosaurus would get stuck, I have no doubts about that. Same with the Camarasaurus that appears later. The ones I have doubts about are the 2 carnivores, Ceratosaurus and Saurophaganax. The lightest animal shown to actually sink in the mud is the juvenile Stegosaurus. While we're never given a proper weight for him, he's likely about half the size of his mother, putting him at a likely weight of around 1 to 1.5 tons. That's about the same weight as the Ceratosaurus, who doesn't get stuck, but would the splayed toes really help that much? As much as I would like to side with poor little Cerato here, believe me, he'll need it, chances are he would get stuck too. Although the show claims that the mud surrounding the lake is covered by a dried upper crust, this probably wasn't the case. Chances are the mud was exposed, causing any creature, no matter how splayed its toes were, to sink in once they stepped their claws into it. So chances are that Ceratosaurus would get stuck as well, and so should the Saurophaganax that appear later. Back to the fight. The Ceratosaurus wisely attacks the juvenile, who is already exhausted from struggling, and kills it by slashing into its exposed flank with its teeth, even though its completely unprotected head is wide open. Regardless, the juvenile is dead and the Ceratosaurus begins to feast. But the fight's not over. In fact, it hasn't even started yet. The smell of blood attracts 3 Saurophaganax who arrive quickly on the scene. George then describes Allosaurus and Ceratosaurus as hated enemies.
But they also pick up the very distinct scent of a Ceratosaurus, and this is the hated enemy of Allosaurus.
Even though, once again, the two didn't really compete much. A more likely candidate would have been the similarly sized Torvosaurus, and even those two probably didn't compete much. Anyway, 2 of the Saurophaganax face the Ceratosaurus head-on while the third goes around to surprise it, even though the Ceratosaurus's eyes are more on the sides of its head, meaning it should have seen the attack coming. Also, it is very unlikely that Allosaurus or Saurophaganax hunted in groups, or at least cooperative. Anyway, the Saurophaganax brutally murder the Ceratosaurus as one of them knocks it over and crushes its neck beneath their foot. Seems a bit harsh when they could have, scared it off rather than wasting energy killing something you're not going to eat. Speaking of not eating things, for some reason, even though the show claims Allosaurus are smarter than Ceratosaurus, the Saurophaganax decide to attack the adult Stegosaurus rather than just eat the already dead juvenile. Like, it's right there, and they just completely ignore it like it disappeared into thin air. In fact, the whole fight should have and would have just stopped here. The Saurophaganax eat the dead juvenile, maybe fight over a bit, get stuck in the mud, and die. There, perfect. But of course, this show is obsessed with murder, so much that I'm a bit concerned about the mental health of the people who made this show. Anyway, further proof that these Allosaurs are idiots is that one of them leans on the mother Stego, causing her tail to free itself, and it kills one of the Saurophaganax. Tell me again how they're supposed to be smarter than Ceratosaurus, the only predator in the entire fight to make any logical decisions. Also, and I do feel the need to stress this very much, go for the head, you idiots! It's right there!
You should have gone for the head.
Also, a Saurophaganax standing on the Stegosaurus' neck most certainly would have broken the spinal column, meaning the Stegosaurus should be dead anyway. Remember, Saurophaganax weighed 3 tons, meaning that's how much weight is being put on the Stegosaurus' neck, which would cause the neck vertebrae to snap like twigs. Meanwhile, a trio of Camarasaurus heads to the lake to drink, completely unaware of the carnage happening 10 feet away from them, but a bull male gets stuck in the mud. Now, the Saurophaganax have 2 choices: continue attacking the Stegosaurus or attack the Camarasaurus. Or, just eating the dead juvenile Stego on the Ceratosaurus so they don't have to risk their lives anymore. God, these dinosaurs are idiots! Anyway, the Saurophaganax stupidly decide to attack the Camarasaurus even though they're literally one bite to the head away from a nice Stegosaurus meal.
The Allosaurus make a very wise decision to abandon the Stegosaurus and go for the Camarasaurus.
Besides, who picks killing a 40-ton behemoth over a mostly restrained, exhausted, vulnerable Stegosaurus? It's like having to choose between attacking a rhino that's bleeding to death or an elephant with his shoes tied together and just going, I'll take my chances with the elephant. My pal decided to jump on the rhino's horns. I'm not taking any chances with that guy. Anyway, the other Camarasaurus flee at the sight of the Saurophaganax, even though they could literally just kill them with a flick of their tails. The predators turn to the bull and begin to tear into his flanks, jumping up on both sides to use their hand and foot claws to their full advantage. Except Saurophaganax was likely too big to jump, so that attack would be useless. Although the Saurophaganax inflict deep wounds on its flanks, the Camarasaurus is easily able to shake off his attackers. Then the show takes a brief pause to explain how Allosaurus would have issues overheating and would need to lose the excess heat through their antorbital fenestra, holes in the skull in front of the eye sockets.
Like modern birds and dogs, the Allosauruses pant in an effort to expel excess body heat. But they also have a special adaptation that allows the heat to escape through their skull. It's a large opening called the antorbital fenestra.
These are present in modern birds, but crocodilians lost this feature. And although they are very large in theropods, I couldn't find anything about their purpose being based around temperature regulation. Once the Saurophaganax have cooled down, they resume their assault, and the narrator talks about why they don't sink in the mud. So I shall remind you that the Saurophaganax are so massive that they would have been stuck in the mud almost immediately after they showed up. Meanwhile, the Camarasaurus manages to use its massive tail to hit one of the Saurophaganax, killing it instantly. The movement of his tail causes his 2 front legs to break free, and he rears up, crushing this remaining Saurophaganax beneath his massive foot. Besides the fact that the Saurophaganax literally runs right under the Camarasaurus' foot when it could have easily stopped itself, there's one massive problem. Camarasaurus could not rear up on its back legs. Now, I am aware that many sauropods are depicted as being able to rear up on their hind legs to reach higher places, and this is very often the case, with the exception of one group of sauropods, the macronarians, which Camarasaurus happens to fall into. See, macronarians are very front-heavy, meaning they were pretty much limited to having at least 3 legs on the ground at all times. In other words, this couldn't happen. Finally, with all the predators dead, the fight ends with the Camarasaurus and the mother Stegosaurus as the only survivors. Unfortunately, this is no happy ending, as the Stegosaurus is still stuck, and the Camarasaurus is now stuck in the mud again after crushing the remaining Saurophaganax, leaving both survivors to die in the heat from exhaustion, thirst, and blood loss. Kind of a sour note to end on. That wraps up the analysis of the fight. There really aren't any other major inaccuracies that I haven't covered already, so I'll just dive right into what really happened. So, this episode is based on the Cleveland Lloyd dinosaur quarry within the Morrison Formation, which lies in what is now the state of Utah, specifically the discovery of a supposed predator trap. For those who don't know, a predator trap is a site which indicates some natural hazard like a tar pit or sticky mud, in which prey animals become trapped, attracting predators which in turn also end up trapped. The increasing body count only serves to attract more and more predators, and thus the predators in these sites typically outnumber the prey, hence their name. Some examples of predator traps include the La Brea tar pits in Los Angeles, and of course the Cleveland Lloyd dinosaur quarry. Well, actually, whether the quarry is truly a predator trap is under much debate, but it's clear what side of the argument the show picked. Essentially, the discovery of several herbivores and a buttload of carnivores was too charming for the producers of the show to pass up, and thus we get the ridiculous gore fest we just went over. Now, I think you probably know by now that the fight depicted is not an accurate depiction of what real paleontologists really think happened. A much better depiction of this phenomena is in the Walking with Dinosaurs special, The Ballad of Big, which has a scene where some Allosaurus attempt to feast off a Stegosaurus which died from exhaustion struggling in the mud, only for them to get stuck in the mud as well while the titular Allosaurus Big Al watches from a distance. That scene perfectly shows exactly where Jurassic Fight Club went wrong in bringing real fossil discoveries to life. The clearest difference between the two is length. The scene in Big Al is only about 2 to 3 minutes long and is simple and to the point, while Jurassic Fight Club's version is much more complicated and much longer, and almost 20 minutes long. The problem that this comparison shows is that Jurassic Fight Club overcomplicates things, trying to make super long fight scenes out of fossil discoveries that other more credible documentaries can explain in a matter of a few minutes. In essence, Jurassic Fight Club forgets perhaps the biggest principle when trying to discover what happened millions of years ago. That principle is, of course, Occam's razor, which states that the simplest explanation is the most likely explanation, and that one should not make lots of its assumptions. Sounds a bit familiar, doesn't it? Now, using Occam's razor as a guide, what is a more likely explanation for what happened in Utah 150 million years ago? Well, as you might expect, it is really very simple. Some herbivores, looking for a drink, found themselves stuck in the mud and died trying to free themselves. This attracts predators who attempt to eat the carcasses only to get stuck themselves and meet the same fate. That's it. No gory battles, no unnecessary violence, just predators and prey alike getting trapped in mud where they die of exhaustion and thirst. In fact, only one of the supposed combatants would have a chance to be spared, and that is, of course, Ceratosaurus, the dinosaur which this show seems to treat like its personal whipping boy. As the show itself admits, only one Ceratosaurus specimen has been found in the entire Cleveland Lloyd quarry, in contrast to Allosaurus, which has over 40 specimens discovered in the quarry. And if the theory that the quarry is a predator trap is true, there's a very simple reason why. Ceratosaurus probably deliberately avoided predator traps like Cleveland Lloyd in order to avoid competing with the larger and stronger Allosaurus for the corpses, something that would surely be suicide. The one Ceratosaurus we did find at the quarry probably came long after the Allosaurus did, and probably met the same fate. Still, I think it's safe to say that in this pathetic excuse for a reconstruction, the lowly Ceratosaurus would have been the closest thing this fight would have to a victor, simply by avoiding the fight altogether. Take that, History Channel. That wraps up this analysis, and I think I can definitely say with absolute truth that this episode matches the inaccuracy levels of its predecessors, and might even surpass them with all the inaccuracies it has. The fight is such a brutal, unnecessary, overcomplicated mess that could have been way simpler, and the episode was more focused on delivering on gore and violence than actually teaching anyone about anything. Out of the entire series, this is definitely the most awesome bro of them all. The predators are depicted as nothing but bloodthirsty monsters constantly in search of a fight, and the herbivores are nothing but fodder. The fight ends up with 5 dinosaurs dead, and given the situation of the survivors, I think it's reasonable to raise the body count to 7 total deaths. Very close to rivaling Gang Killers for the most deaths of any episode. At this rate, I have absolutely zero faith in this show redeeming itself. Regardless, I have a duty to fulfill, and that duty is to finish this series and hope that everyone understands how this show is basically the how-to for how not to make a good documentary about dinosaurs. That wraps up this video. Hope you enjoyed it and that you learned something new today. My next video will likely be my analysis of the next episode, Deep Sea Killers. Although I might decide to finally finish my natural history of Tyrannosaurids, so expect either another analysis or more Tyrannosaurs. Thanks for watching, be sure to like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.